My life is a little bit mad at the minute. I don't really have much time to film because my mum is visiting from Dublin, so I'm spending like all of the daytime with her, and I'm only getting the chance to film and edit in the evening, which means the lighting is really, really crap. Hopefully what I'm saying will be good enough to keep you interested to make up for the terrible visuals that are going on right now. I expected March to be a really lackluster reading month compared to January and February, but it actually went really well. I was really pleased with how much reading I did. A lot of it was course books, but that's fine. A lot of my reading time was taken up by reading The Beast, that is Middlemarch, which I still haven't finished yet, so that will definitely feature in the April wrap-up, otherwise something has gone terribly wrong. I'm going to start with two books that I forgot to mention in my mid-March haul, and they are the young adult World Book Day books. The first of which is Spot the Difference by Juno Dawson. I quite enjoyed this book. It was a nice enough read. It's about a teenage girl called Avery who has been bullied all throughout school for having really bad acne and very bad skin. So I can definitely relate to her in that respect. She is offered this new cure that is on the market, which works really well. It manages to ease her acne and make her skin a lot clearer. And then she suddenly finds herself becoming a lot more popular and runs for the student elections in her school. I thought this was a nice enough short story. It definitely fits with the aim of these World Book Day books, which is to start getting those that wouldn't normally read into reading. It's very, very current. Also a lot of decent representation in this. I think there's representation of disability, which is really good to see from a young adult story. It touches on things like sexism and homophobia and transphobia. Still managed to get your hands on a copy of this. I don't know if they're still knocking around. Then I would recommend it just for a nice quick read. Second of the young adult World Book Day books was Kindred Spirirts by Rowell, and I'm a really, really big Rowell fan. This is probably the least interesting book that I've read from her, but it is only a short story. She does manage to pack a lot into the 60 or 80 or so pages that this is. This is about a girl called Elena who queues up to watch the latest episode of Star Wars, The Force Awakens. So it's very, very current, set only in December of last year. But this book is not about Star Wars. You can enjoy it no matter how big or little of a Star Wars fan you are. I don't really know much about Star Wars. I've seen all the films, but I'm not that into them. And the fact that it's about Star Wars isn't actually that important to the story. It's more about fandom in general. And at that, it's not necessarily about fandom. It's about, you know, friendships and how we see other people and family. Again, really good to see representation of a female Asian protagonist in this. The World Book Day books are hitting representation pretty well, I think. Next up, I read another Rowell book. I read Fangirl, and I read that on my Kobo app on my phone. Fangirl wasn't one of those books that left me thinking about it for ages afterwards. I know it's so many people's favourite book, or at least favourite YA book. And, you know, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good, but it hasn't stayed with me. Fangirl is about two girls that go off to college or university. They are twin sisters, and it is about the changes in their lives, particularly the more introverted one, Kath, I think her name is. The changes in their lives that come about when they go to university, and it's about the changes in their relationships, both with each other and with the people around them. The protagonist also writes a lot of fan fiction. She's like a famous fan fiction writer. I think for a while that really put me off Fangirl. I thought it was going to be really cheesy, but it wasn't. It was really good. And I'm really excited to read Carry On, which is Rowell has written the fan fiction that Kat is writing throughout the course of Fangirl. Something I thought was really good about Fangirl as well was the representation of mental health issues in older men. The twins' father definitely suffers from some sort of mental health issues, and it was really good to see that representation in the novel. I thought the relationship that the father had with the girls was very, very touching. Next, I read What We Left Behind by Robin Talley, and I also read that on my phone. This is another story about people going off to university, and I feel like that got slightly muddled with Fangirl in my head because I read them so close together. What We Left Behind is about a couple who at the start of the novel are presented as a lesbian couple. They were sort of like the dream amazing couple at their all-girls school, and then they end up going off to different universities. And it is about how their relationships with each other and their relationships with themselves changes over the course of that year. At the novel, you watch Tony struggle with their gender identity. I'm going to use the pronoun there because it is gender neutral. But throughout the book, they're struggling about what pronouns they want to use, whether they identify as trans or not, or gender queer, whether they actually want to go through the process of having hormone treatments. I think this book did a really good job of representing that side of things, the fact that gender is a spectrum, it's not a binary. It did a good job of showing how different people approach their gender identity differently. But as far as the other letters in LGBT plus goes, I don't think the book did a very good job of representing those. I don't think the representation of lesbians or the representation of gay men was done very well. Some of the novel I found quite misogynistic, and I don't know if that was just the characters or something from the writer. I think it was from the characters, but I don't think you were really encouraged to challenge the characters that much. And I think from a YA novel, I expected that sort of criticism. Yeah, this book was a little hit and miss for me. Next, I have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Again, I have a very nice vintage copy of that, so I'm very happy with it. It was one of my New Year's bookish resolutions to start reading more Austen. I didn't massively enjoy Pride and Prejudice. I understand why so many people like it. I think it is written really well. I think the themes and the purpose of the novel are really good. I definitely understand why people like it. I just found it a little boring. There's not a lot of action until the elopement. When the elopement came around, I was like, oh yes, there's finally a bit of drama. Didn't find Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy that interesting as a couple. I understand why people do, because like they change each other so much, but I really liked that it was a criticism of the class system. I love how sassy Jane Austen is. That was great. I feel like a bad lit student and a bad feminist because I didn't really enjoy that much. I'm definitely going to read more Jane Austen. I really want to expand my horizons with it, and maybe I'll like some of her other novels a bit more. I am going to go watch some of Katie from Books and Things videos on Jane Austen. Hopefully that can awaken more of an enthusiasm within me. Next up, these are all the course books I read in March, and I enjoyed these to varying degrees. Starting with Waterland by Graham Swift, which I didn't really enjoy that much. This is about a history teacher, and he has been fired from his job because his wife stole a baby. And then the whole book is sort of a mismatch of present day and his memories and trying to piece what exactly is going on all together. If you are very much into representations of like place and the environment in novels, and you're into postmodern literature, then I would really recommend this book to you, but it really wasn't for me. Next, I read Sexing the Cherry by Jeanette Winterson. I love Jeanette Winterson. People are very hit and miss with Jeanette Winterson. You really either you love her or you hate her. You either find her like horribly pretentious, or like me, you find her, oh my god, she's so pretentious, I love her. Really enjoyed this book. It features criticisms of patriarchy. It has historiography, particularly like feminist historiography. It has the grotesque in there, blurs the lines between reality and fiction. I'm doing a lot of revision on this book at the minute, and I'm actually really enjoying doing it. And a very postmodern text. Next, for my children's literature module, I read When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr. You may know Judith Kerr from her other children's books like When the Tiger Came to Tea and the Mog book. This is an autobiographical book about Judith Kerr's childhood when she had to seek refuge from Germany because of the rise of the Nazis. Her father was a journalist and was quite outspoken against Hitler, and that is why the family had to be snuck out of the country. And this book follows them as they go from Germany to Switzerland to France to England, I think. So this was a really interesting book, but I expected it to be more exciting and intriguing than it was. It's actually a very simple children's story. A lot of the war stuff is in subtext of the book. Because it is narrated by a child, the child doesn't really understand what's going on, and they actually really enjoy being a refugee and traveling around all these different countries and learning about different cultures. And Judith Kerr has said herself that she really enjoyed being a refugee, which is so interesting. I also read the illustrated edition of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, written by J.K. Rowling and illustrated by Jim Kay. I really enjoyed rereading this book. Oh, it was so nice. It was like so warm and nice to reread it. The illustrations in this are absolutely gorgeous. My only criticism is that I wanted more illustrations. There wasn't a picture of Hermione until really late on, but I expected one as soon as she was introduced. I would give an explanation of the plot, but I don't really feel like there's a need. The release date for the illustrated Chamber of Secrets has come out recently. It's like early October. I'm wondering what they're gonna do with these books when it starts to get into the bigger books. Like how are they gonna illustrate the entirety of like Order of the Phoenix? How is that gonna work? And the final course book of this wrap up and my penultimate course book of the year is Trumpet by Jackie Kay. This book follows the aftermath of the death of a jazz musician called Joss Moody and the impact that that death has on the people in his life, mainly his wife and his son. After Joss's death and through like post-mortem and things like that, everyone discovers that Joss was born with like female anatomy, so he had breasts and a vagina. He was a man. And part of this book follows how that information impacts the life of his son. His son is adopted, and how his son struggles to come to terms with that information. He begins to examine his past and his relationship with his father and kind of look for signs. And this also follows the grief that Joss's wife goes through, which I found really touching. This book also has a lot to do with race and what it's like to be black in the UK and specifically like London and Scotland. I loved this book. I flew through this book in one sitting. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was amazing. I take one issue with the blurb because it says, the death of legendary jazz trumpeter Joss Moody exposes an extraordinary secret. Unbeknown to all but his wife Millie, Joss was a woman living as a man. I take issue with that line, woman living as a man. He was a man who was assigned female at birth. I understand why they've written it like that, and I don't think the book reflects that line on the back of the blurb. But yeah. Next up is another book that I absolutely flew through, and that is The Magic Thief by Kendall Kulper. This is about a boy called Mal. For most of the novel he's 18, but there are flashbacks to when he's younger, like 13 and 14. And he is a blank. He lives in a magical society, but people like him are referred to as blanks. People who don't have magic and aren't affected by magic. There's lots of myth and rumor around blanks. People think that if you touch a blank, you start to lose your magic, and blanks are just seen as the worst of the worst. They are seen like vermin. Mal is betrayed by one of his friends who announces to everyone that Mal is a blank, and then Mal has to leave the island, and then he becomes what is called a hunter, and he works with a older man, and they go around hunting for magical items which they can then sell on. And obviously Mal's skill in not being affected by magic is really useful for that. I thought this novel was really interesting. It wasn't one of those books that left me thinking about it afterwards, but as a very simple fantasy novel, I really enjoyed it. And finally, I have What a Way to Go by Julia Forster. I loved this book. I thought it was so great. This is about a 12-year-old girl called Harper and what it means to be a 12-year-old girl going through puberty. Really enjoyed the representation of periods in this book. More periods in books, please. I want more menstruation in my literature. Harper is a really funny and brilliant narrator. I really enjoyed the moments I got in her head through this book. Her parents are divorced, and a lot of the book is also to do with how she deals with that. It's to do with her first relationship and things like a first kiss, again learning about puberty and all that comes with that. So dealing with death and grief. This book also deals with homophobia, and I just loved this book so much. It's not like an epic story of the most important thing that has ever happened in the world. It is just the life of one family, but I loved that so much. I love stories about families, and I love stories that are about just ordinary people. Such a warm book. It was the perfect sit in bed with a cup of tea read, and I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to everyone. This book I don't think is getting enough recognition. It is such a good book. So yeah, I read 12 books in March. Really didn't expect that at all. To be fair, some of them were very short. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? And fingers crossed for another really great reading month in April.